Ever been told to move seats on a plane? Annoying, right? But what if the pilot, oozing disdain, singled out your family, forcing you from your paid first-class seats with flimsy excuses that reeked of something far uglier? Imagine the humiliation. Now imagine the pilot's face mid-flight when he receives a message. The black family he just demeaned doesn't just have tickets. They own the entire damn airline. Buckle up, because for the Harrison family, this mid-air nightmare aboard a state-of-the-art Airbus A350 turned into the ultimate karma delivery service. This isn't just a story about prejudice, it's about power. A shocking revelation at 30,000 feet, and the day a pompous pilot learned the hardest lesson of his high-flying career. You won't believe how this jaw-dropping drama unfolds. The polished chrome and hushed efficiency of the Aerolux Premier First-Class Lounge at JFK International usually offered a serene overture to a journey. For the Harrison family today was supposed to be particularly special. David Harrison, a man whose quiet demeanor often belied the sharp intellect and formidable success that had built Harrison Aviation Group from a single leased plane into a global logistics and private charter empire, which unbeknownst to most was the parent company of Aerolux Premier, was taking his family to Paris. It was a dual celebration, his 20th wedding anniversary, with his brilliant wife, Sarah, a former corporate lawyer, now spearheading their philanthropic foundation, and their son Elias's acceptance into a prestigious aerospace engineering program. Chloe, their bright, perpetually curious 12-year-old, was mostly excited about Disneyland Paris and genuine French croissants. David watched his family, a soft smile playing on his lips. Sarah was elegantly scrolling through messages on her tablet, likely coordinating details for the youth STEM center they were funding in their home city. Elias, headphones on, was already sketching something complex in a notebook, a new wing design perhaps. Chloe was meticulously arranging her travel teddy bear, Captain Cuddles, on the plush lounge seat beside her. They were a portrait of understated success, their expensive but not ostentatious luggage neatly arranged. The first discordant note, almost too subtle to register, came at the VIP check-in counter. The agent, a woman with a professionally polite but cool gaze, seemed to do a fractional double-take when David stated his name. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard a moment longer than necessary. The Harrison party for Paris flight, AL777. She'd asked, her tone just a shade too questioning. That's correct, David had replied, his voice even. And these are all your bags for first class. She gestured vaguely, her eyes flicking from their carry-ons to their checked luggage tags. It wasn't overtly rude, but the implication, the faint surprise that they were the first-class passengers, hung in the air. Sarah's spine had stiffened almost imperceptibly. She'd caught it too. Then came the boarding call. As they approached the priority lane, another passenger, a portly man in a slightly too loud designer shirt, huffed audibly and tried to push past them, muttering something about some people having no respect for cues. Elias, ever the observant one, had simply raised an eyebrow and given the man a pointed look until he backed off, grumbling. These were the pinpricks, the familiar little aggressions they'd learned to navigate, to deflect with grace, or, when necessary, with a firmness that left no room for misinterpretation. They were wealthy, successful, and black, a combination that even in the 21st century still seemed to short-circuit some people's expectations. Usually these moments were fleeting, quickly overshadowed by the privileges their hard-earned success afforded them. As they settled into their spacious first-class pods, 1A and 1B for David and Sarah, 2A and 2B for Elias and Chloe, a sense of relief began to wash over them. The cabin was immaculate, the flight attendants welcoming. Chloe was already exploring the amenities of her seat with wide-eyed delight, while Elias was inspecting the in-flight entertainment system with a critical eye. Sarah finally relaxed, taking David's hand and giving it a squeeze. "Paris," she whispered, her eyes shining. "Paris," he echoed, already anticipating the quiet joy of their anniversary dinner overlooking the Seine. He glanced out the window at the bustling tarmac. They were flying on one of Aerolux Premier's flagship aircraft, an Airbus A350, specifically one of the newer additions to the fleet. Harrison Aviation Group had financed the acquisition of 10 such planes for Aerolux, a detail known only to the highest echelons of both companies. For David, flying Aerolux wasn't just about luxury. It was about inspecting his investment, albeit usually incognito. The cabin doors were soon to close. Passengers were making their final adjustments. A senior flight attendant, a woman with a tight blonde bun and an air of stressed efficiency named Karen, was moving through the cabin, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Everything seemed normal, but the calm was about to be shattered. The universe, it seemed, had one more much larger test for the Harrison family before they reached the City of Lights. A test that would begin with the authoritative, slightly condescending voice of the man in charge of their multi-million-dollar aircraft. The final passenger had just stowed their carry-on when Captain Rex Stallard emerged from the cockpit. He was a man who wore his uniform like a suit of armor, and his authority like a crown. Tall, with a neatly trimmed silver-grey moustache and eyes that seemed to permanently squint in appraisal, he exuded an air of old-school command. He surveyed the first-class cabin, his gaze lingering for a moment too long on the Harrison family. It wasn't a look of welcome, but one of calculation. He conferred briefly with Karen, the senior flight attendant, their voices low and urgent. Karen then approached David Harrison, her professional smile looking a little strained. "Mr. Harrison, apologies for this last-minute inconvenience," she began, her voice a little too bright. "Captain Stallard has requested, well, there's a slight adjustment needed for weight and balance. We'll need to reseat your party." David frowned. "Reseat us? We're all confirmed here. Is there an issue with the seats themselves?" He knew aircraft. Weight and balance issues were genuine, but usually sorted long before passengers boarded, and rarely involved moving an entire family from a premium cabin. "Not with the seats, sir," Karen said, avoiding his gaze for a split second. "It's just an operational requirement. We have some other passengers who need to be accommodated up here." Sarah, who had been listening intently, interjected, her tone polite but firm. "Other passengers? But first class is fully booked. We booked these specific seats months ago." Captain Stallard chose that moment to stride over his presence, immediately dominating the space. "Folks," he started, his voice carrying a forced bonhomie that didn't quite mask an underlying impatience. "Sorry for the disruption. We've got a bit of a sensitive weight distribution issue on this flight, and unfortunately your group is, well, you'll need to move." "Move where, Captain?" David asked, keeping his voice level, though a knot of unease was tightening in his stomach. He could feel the eyes of other first-class passengers on them. Stallard gestured vaguely towards the rear of the plane. "We have some seats available in premium economy. It's still very comfortable, I assure you." Chloe's face fell. "But our special seats," she whispered, looking at her father. "Premium economy." Sarah's voice rose a notch. "Captain, with all due respect, we paid for first class. These are our assigned seats. If there's a weight and balance issue, Surely there are other configurations or solutions that don't involve moving an entire family who are already settled. She knew her rights, and she knew airline protocols. This was highly irregular. Stallard's smile vanished, replaced by a condescending smirk. "Ma'am, I am the captain of this aircraft. My decisions are final and are based on safety and operational necessity. Frankly, it's easier to move your group than to start shifting individual passengers all over the cabin. We need to get this bird in the air." He looked pointedly at David. "I'm sure you understand." The implication was clear. Don't make a fuss. The easier to move your group comment hung heavy with unspoken prejudice. Elias, who had taken off his headphones, was now watching the captain with a cold, appraising stare. He subtly angled his phone, its screen dark in the direction of the unfolding drama. "No, Captain, I don't entirely understand," David said, his voice still calm, but now edged with steel. "We have 4 first-class tickets confirmed and paid for. What is the specific operational requirement that necessitates moving us specifically and not, say, offering volunteers a downgrade with compensation as is standard procedure?" Stallard's face hardened. "Look, I don't have time to debate this. These are my operational parameters. You can either move voluntarily, or I can have you deplaned for refusing to comply with crew instructions. We need your seats. Now." His eyes flicked over them, a dismissive glance that spoke volumes. It was the look of a man who had already judged them and found them wanting, or perhaps simply inconvenient. The other passengers were now openly staring. Some looked sympathetic, others embarrassed, and a few disturbingly seemed to nod in agreement with the captain. The humiliation was a palpable wave washing over the Harrisons. Chloe's eyes welled up. Sarah put a protective arm around her, her own eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and disbelief. David looked at his wife, at his children. He could fight this. He could stand his ground, quote regulations demand to see the airline's ground supervisor. But he also saw the distress on Chloe's face, the simmering anger in Elias, and the tight, controlled fury in Sarah, causing a scene being forcibly removed. That was the drama Stallard seemed to be angling for, or at least indifferent to causing. With a heavy sigh, David made a decision. "Fine, Captain," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "We will move, but I expect a full explanation and appropriate compensation from Aerolux Premier for this, inconvenience." Of course," Stallard said dismissively, already turning away as if the matter was beneath him. "Karen, escort them to their new seats, and let's get this plane buttoned up." Karen, looking flustered and avoiding their eyes, led the Harrison family on a walk of shame past the other first-class passengers, through the business-class cabin, and into premium economy. The seats were, as Stallard had suggested, comfortable enough, but they weren't first class. They weren't the seats they had chosen, paid for, and anticipated for their special trip. As they buckled themselves in, surrounded by strangers who were now curiously eyeing the family that had just been demoted. Sarah leaned over to David. "This is outrageous, David. Absolutely outrageous. Weight and balance. He's lying." "I know," David said grimly, his jaw tight. "And he's going to regret it." Elias, sitting beside Chloe, quietly reviewed the video he'd taken. The audio was clear. The captain's dismissive tone, his flimsy excuses the threat. He looked at his father. "Got it all, Dad?" David nodded. "Good. Hold on to that, son." The engines of the Airbus A350 began to roar to life. For the Harrisons, the journey to Paris had begun not with champagne and excitement, but with a bitter taste of injustice and humiliation. But high above the Atlantic, the wheels of another kind of justice were slowly, almost imperceptibly beginning to turn. Captain Rex Stallard had made a very, very big mistake. He just didn't know it yet. The ascent was smooth, the Airbus A350 cutting through the clouds with its customary grace. But for the Harrison family, the atmosphere in premium economy was thick with unspoken anger and a lingering sense of shock. Chloe, usually bubbly, leaned against Sarah, her earlier excitement extinguished. Sarah herself was a coiled spring of indignation, her mind already drafting letters of complaint, considering legal avenues. David remained outwardly composed, but a storm was brewing beneath the surface. He wasn't just a wronged passenger. He was the owner of the airline being treated with such blatant disrespect. The irony was as bitter as it was profound. Elias, ever the pragmatist, was already at work. He connected to the in-flight Wi-Fi, his fingers flying across his laptop keyboard. He wasn't just idly browse. He was digging. He pulled up Aerolux Premier's own passenger rights policies, FAA regulations, regarding discriminatory practices and articles about flying while black. He cross-referenced Captain Stallard's name, with pilot databases looking for any public records or previous complaints. Meanwhile, in the first-class cabin, an uneasy quiet had settled. The passengers who had witnessed the exchange were left to their own interpretations. Some felt a vicarious discomfort, others a smug justification. Captain Stallard, having asserted his authority, had retreated to the cockpit, leaving the flight attendants to manage the cabin. Karen, the senior flight attendant, felt a knot of anxiety. Stallard's reasoning for the seat change had felt thin, even to her. She'd worked with him for years. He was known for his rigid adherence to rules when it suited him, and his equally rigid disregard for them when it didn't. He had a reputation for being particular, and his particularities sometimes veered into uncomfortable territory. She'd tried to catch his eye after the Harrisons were moved, hoping for a more concrete explanation she could note in her report, but he'd brushed her off. A younger flight attendant, Maria, who had been serving the business-class cabin but had overheard the commotion, approached Karen in the galley. "That was intense," Maria ventured, her eyes wide. Why did he really move them, Karen weight and balance, for an entire family from first? It doesn't add up. Karen sighed, rubbing her temples. "Captain's orders, Maria. We don't question the captain, especially not Stallard." But the doubt was evident in her voice. He said something about needing to accommodate sensitive passengers. Maybe government officials' last-minute security detail, I don't know. But no such passengers had boarded or been mentioned in their pre-flight briefing. Back in premium economy, David made a decision. This wasn't just about getting a refund for the seat difference. This was about the principle, the blatant discrimination. He needed to contact his executive team at Harrison Aviation Group. He tried his satellite phone, a perk of his position usually reserved for critical business, but the signal was patchy inside the cabin. "Elias," he said quietly, "can you get a message out? A specific one to a specific person." Elias looked up from his laptop. "The Wi-Fi is surprisingly decent. Who and what?" David gave him a private email address, not his public Harrison Aviation one, but a direct line. To his chief operating officer, a formidable woman named Eleanor Vance, who ran the day-to-day of his vast enterprise with military precision. "Tell Eleanor incident on AL-777, code red, Atticus Protocol." She'll know what it means. Atticus Protocol. Elias raised an eyebrow. It sounded serious. David nodded. "It's a discreet flag for urgent, sensitive shareholder-level issues that require immediate, quiet investigation and intervention, especially when I'm traveling incognito and can't directly intervene without revealing my position prematurely." Elias typed quickly, encrypted the message, and sent it. A small delivered receipt popped up. "Sent Dad." For the next hour, an uneasy truce held. Drinks and meals were served. The Harrisons ate mechanically the exquisite flavors of Parisian cuisine they'd been anticipating, now a distant thought. David kept glancing at his phone, willing a response that he knew might take time to filter through the corporate chain, even with Eleanor at the helm. Then Elias, who had been monitoring flight crew forums and even some semi-public FAA incident logs, he had his ways, suddenly sat upright. "Dad, Mom, look at this." He turned his laptop screen towards them. It was an internal Aerolux employee forum, a discussion thread from a few months back, heavily anonymized, but clearly referencing a captain matching Stallard's description and flight routes. The thread detailed accusations of preferential treatment for certain passengers and abrupt, unexplained seating changes, with undertones of racial bias in several comments. There was even a mention of a near-identical weight and balance excuse being used to move a minority couple from business to economy on a transatlantic flight. "He has a pattern." Sarah breathed, her eyes narrowing. "This isn't an isolated incident." Chloe, who had been trying to distract herself with a movie, sensed the renewed tension. "What is it, Mommy?" Sarah stroked her hair. "Just grown-up stuff, sweetie. Don't you worry." But her mind was racing. This wasn't just one arrogant pilot. This could be a systemic issue that Aerolux, their own company, was failing to address. The pieces were clicking into place. Captain Stallard wasn't just an overzealous enforcer of dubious rules. He was, it seemed, a man who abused his authority, likely with a history of doing so, particularly towards people he profiled as less powerful or less deserving. As if on cue, a chime sounded on Elias's laptop. A new email. It was short, cryptic, and not from Eleanor, but forwarded through a secure channel. It read, "Message received. Stand by. Confirmation in progress. Higher authorities source. Now monitoring AL777 comms." David read it, then looked at Sarah. A grim understanding passed between them. Higher authorities meant Eleanor had escalated it. The situation was now officially on the radar at the highest levels of Harrison Aviation Group, and by extension, Aerolux Premier. Up in the cockpit, co-pilot Mark Jenkins, a younger, more progressive aviator, who often found Stallard's old guard bluster grating, noticed a new blinking light on their ACAR's aircraft communications, addressing and reporting system terminal. It was a priority message from Aerolux Central Operations. Usually these were routine flight plan updates or weather advisories. This one was flagged urgent, Captain Eyes only. He printed it and handed it to Stallard. Message from Ops Captain, marked urgent. Stallard took it with a grunt, annoyed at the interruption to his perusal of a well-worn aviation magazine. His eyes scanned the brief message. CPT Stallard, AL777, confirm manifest details for passengers. Harrison D, Harrison S, Harrison E, Harrison C. Original seating 1, A1A 2A 2B. Current seating. Urgent clarification required unsolicited downgrade. Possible code Sierra Alpha. Stallard frowned. Code Sierra Alpha. What in the blazes is that, some new HR nonsense? He scoffed. Manifest details. They're in premium economy. Weight and balance. Tell them I'll file the full report on arrival. Busy up here. He waved dismissively, not even bothering to look at Jenkins. He had no idea what Code Sierra Alpha meant. It wasn't in any standard operational manual he cared to remember. Probably some VIP fussing. Jenkins, however, felt a prickle of unease. He knew Sierra Alpha was sometimes used internally for special attention individuals, major stakeholders, board members, audit teams. He hesitated. Captain Sierra Alpha usually indicates very high priority. Perhaps we should clarify the reason for the move more specifically. Stallard shot him an irritated glare. I gave the reason. Weight and balance. It's my call, Jenkins, not ops, and certainly not yours. Send the reply. Passengers relocated per operational requirements. Details upon landing. Now let me have some peace. Reluctantly, Jenkins typed out the terse reply. But he had a sinking feeling. Stallard's arrogance was legendary, but this time it felt like he was flying blind into a storm of his own making. The Harrison Party. The name suddenly felt more significant than just 4 disgruntled passengers. The reply from Captain Stallard, curt and dismissive, flashed up on Eleanor Vance's secure monitor in the Harrison Aviation Group's Emergency Operations Center, a facility typically reserved for managing aviation crises like natural disasters affecting their fleet or major security threats. Eleanor, a woman whose composure was as legendary as her efficiency, felt a muscle twitch in her jaw. Operational requirements, she muttered, reading Stallard's reply. He's either a fool or extraordinarily arrogant. Likely both, she suspected. She'd already cross-referenced Code Sierra Alpha with David Harrison's personal file. It was a designation he'd created himself, Shareholder Alpha, to be used only in extreme circumstances where his or his family's well-being or the company's core integrity was directly compromised while he was operating incognito. Activating it meant all bets were off. Eleanor had also pulled the passenger manifest and Stallard's file. The captain had a few commendations for fuel efficiency, but also a troubling number of sealed complaints. Interpersonal conflicts, passenger disputes. None had resulted in disciplinary action beyond a verbal warning likely due to union protections or insufficient evidence from passengers unwilling to go through lengthy formal processes. But the pattern combined with David's message and Elias's subsequent email detailing the video evidence painted a damning picture. Get me direct comms to the AL777 cockpit, Eleanor instructed her team. No more ACARS messages. Voice. Patch me through to the co-pilot first if possible. And someone get me the CEO of Aerolux Premier on the line. Now. A few minutes later, in the cockpit of AL777 co-pilot Mark Jenkins was startled by a direct SATCOM call being routed to his headset. It was unusual for ops to bypass the captain for direct voice communication, unless it was a dire emergency. Co-pilot Jenkins, this is Eleanor Vance, COO of Harrison Aviation Group, parent company of Aerolux Premier. Am I speaking to you on a private channel? Her voice was calm, professional, but with an undeniable undercurrent of command. Jenkins's blood ran cold. Harrison Aviation Group, the ultimate authority. He glanced at Stallard, who was engrossed in a crossword puzzle oblivious. Ma'am, yes, this is co-pilot Jenkins. Captain Stallard is present, but occupied. Is there an issue? There is a grave issue, Mr. Jenkins. Eleanor stated, her tone chilling. You have a passenger family, the Harrisons, who were forcibly removed from their confirmed first-class seats by Captain Stallard under the pretext of weight and balance. Is this correct? Jenkins swallowed hard. Yes, ma'am. That is what occurred. Mr. Jenkins, I need you to understand the severity of this situation. The Harrison family are not just any passengers. Mr. David Harrison is the founder and majority shareholder of Harrison Aviation Group. He is in effect the ultimate owner of Aerolux Premier and this very aircraft you are flying. Code Sierra Alpha designates Shareholder Alpha. Captain Stallard has just ejected the owner of the airline from his own first-class cabin. The silence from Jenkins was so profound, Eleanor could hear the faint hum of the A350's avionics. He felt like the bottom had dropped out of his stomach. The Harrisons owned the airline. He looked at Stallard, who was now idly scratching his chin with his pen. The picture of arrogant ignorance. "Ma'am." Jenkins finally managed his voice barely a whisper. I had no idea." Captain Stallard handled the interaction. He cited operational necessity. His operational necessity is about to cause an incident of catastrophic proportions for his career and for Aerolux's reputation, Eleanor said grimly. "I need you to discreetly inform Captain Stallard of the identity of his passengers immediately. I expect him to take immediate corrective action. That includes a personal, unreserved apology and an offer to reinstate the Harrison family to their rightful seats or to any arrangements they now prefer. Is that understood?" "Understood, ma'am. Perfectly." Jenkins's mind was reeling. He had to tell Stallard. This was going to be a crash landing of a conversation. He took a deep breath. "Captain," he began, his voice carefully neutral. "I've just received a direct communication from the COO of Harrison Aviation Group." Stallard looked up annoyed. "Harrison Aviation? What do they want? Can't it wait?" "No, sir, it cannot," Jenkins said, his voice firmer now. "It's about the Harrison family you moved from first class," Stallard scoffed. "Still on about that? Are they threatening to write a nasty letter? Tell Harrison Aviation I followed procedure." "Captain," Jenkins said, choosing his words carefully. "Mr. David Harrison is Harrison Aviation Group. He and his family own the company that owns this airline. You've moved the ultimate owner of Aerolux Premier, sir." Stallard stared at Jenkins, his jaw slowly dropping. The pen slipped from his fingers and clattered to the cockpit floor. His ruddy complexion began to pale, a ghastly shade of grey replacing it. "Owns? You're joking, Jenkins. This is some kind of prank." "It's no prank, Captain," Jenkins said, handing him the printout of the earlier ACARS message with code Sierra Alpha now circled. "Ms. Vance, the COO, just confirmed it. They are monitoring this flight very closely. She expects you to rectify the situation." The arrogance drained from Stallard's face like air from a punctured balloon. It was replaced by a dawning, sickening horror. He thought back to the confrontation, his dismissive tone, his condescending smirk, his threat to deplane them. He remembered the look in Mr. Harrison's eyes, not anger, but a cold, appraising calm that he had mistaken for reluctant compliance. He remembered the wife's fiery gaze, the son's silent recording. He felt a wave of nausea. His career, his reputation, his pension, all flashed before his eyes. He had insulted, humiliated, and displaced not just a valued customer, but the very man who held the fate of the entire airline, including his own job in his hands. "Oh, God," Stallard whispered, his bravado gone. "What have I done?" He looked wildly at Jenkins. "Get them back up here. We need to get them back. Tell them there was a terrible misunderstanding. A systems error with the manifest." Jenkins just looked at him, his expression unreadable. "You should probably go and speak to them yourself, Captain. Ms. Vance specifically mentioned a personal, unreserved apology." Stallard fumbled with his seatbelt, his hands shaking. He scrambled out of his seat, nearly tripping. The confident, authoritative captain was gone, replaced by a frantic, terrified man. He practically ran from the cockpit, leaving Jenkins to shake his head and communicate to Eleanor Vance. "Captain Stallard is en route to speak with the Harrison family now." Down in premium economy, The Harrisons had seen the flurry of activity. Flight attendants were whispering urgently, their eyes darting towards them with a newfound mixture of awe and trepidation. David Harrison met Sarah's gaze. "Showtime," he murmured. Then they saw him. Captain Rex Stallard, no longer the imperious commander, but a flustered, pale figure stumbling down the aisle towards them, his uniform suddenly looking too big for him. The turbulence of truth had hit him full force, and his world was officially upside down. Captain Stallard approached the Harrisons' row in premium economy, his face a mask of strained politeness and barely concealed panic. The other passengers in the section, sensing a significant development, fell silent, their attention riveted. Mr. Harrison," Stallard began, his voice cracking slightly. He attempted a smile that looked more like a grimace. "There appears to have been a most regrettable misunderstanding. A communications error regarding the passenger manifest. A terrible, terrible mistake on our part." David Harrison looked at him, his expression unreadable. Sarah's gaze was like chips of ice. Elias had his phone subtly angled again, though by now the damage was already well documented. Chloe just looked confused by the captain's sudden change in demeanor. "A mistake, Captain," David said, his voice quiet, but carrying easily in the hushed cabin. "You seemed quite certain of your operational requirements and weight and balance issues earlier. You were also quite clear about your authority and our options." Stallard visibly winced. "Yes, well, it seems the information I was acting upon was erroneous. Completely my fault for not double-checking. Please allow me to personally escort you and your family back to your first-class seats. We'll have champagne waiting. Whatever you desire." He gestured expansively, almost pleadingly. Sarah Harrison spoke her voice, cutting through Stallard's desperate attempts at conciliation. "Captain, are you saying the weight and balance of this Airbus A350 has miraculously rectified itself in the last hour? Or were you perhaps less than truthful with us earlier?" Stallard's collar seemed to tighten. He stammered, "It was a misinterpretation of complex data, Mrs. Harrison. Look, I am deeply, profoundly sorry for the distress this has caused. I take full responsibility." His eyes darted around, noticing the curious and judgmental stares of other passengers. He was hemorrhaging authority and dignity with every passing second. David Harrison held up a hand. "Captain, we appreciate your newfound concern. However, my family and I are quite settled here now. We wouldn't want to cause any further disruption by moving again." But you must," Stallard blurted out, a note of desperation creeping into his voice. "It's unthinkable for you to remain here. Please, Mr. Harrison, as a personal favor." "A personal favor?" David raised an eyebrow. "Captain, when we were in first class, you made it abundantly clear that personal preferences, even paid for contractual rights, were secondary to your operational decisions. We will adhere to your earlier very firm directive and remain where you placed us. We wouldn't want to compromise the delicate weight and balance you were so concerned about." The sarcasm was subtle but devastating. Stallard looked like he'd been physically struck. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He knew he was beaten. He had no authority here anymore, not with them. He was exposed, humiliated, and utterly powerless. The man he had dismissed and demeaned now held all the cards. I understand," he mumbled, his shoulders slumping. "If there's anything at all I can do from the cockpit, anything." "Thank you, Captain," David said dismissively. "You may return to your duties. We will discuss this matter further upon landing in Paris, with your superiors and ours." The finality in David's tone was unmistakable. Stallard nodded mutely, turned and made the long, ignominious walk back to the cockpit, acutely aware of every eye boring into his back. The swagger was gone, replaced by the shuffling gait of a defeated man. When he re-entered the cockpit, co-pilot Jenkins didn't even look at him. He was busy communicating with Aerolux Ops, likely giving them a play-by-play. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken condemnation. Stallard slumped into his seat, the reality of his situation crashing down on him with the force of a hard landing. He'd not only insulted passengers, he'd insulted the owners. His career wasn't just in jeopardy, it was likely over. For the remainder of the flight, a strange quiet descended upon the aircraft. The flight attendants, especially Karen, were almost tripping over themselves to offer the Harrisons extra amenities in premium economy. Complimentary champagne politely refused first-class meal options accepted for Chloe, who was genuinely hungry, and endless apologetic smiles. Karen, in particular, looked deeply ashamed. She approached Sarah Harrison, once her voice low. "Mrs. Harrison, I am so incredibly sorry for my part in this. I should have questioned the captain more forcefully. There's no excuse." Sarah looked at her, her expression softening slightly. "Your captain put you in an untenable position. However, a reminder that just following orders can lead to complicity and injustice is perhaps a lesson for everyone here." Karen nodded, her eyes glistening, and retreated. Elias, meanwhile, had received another encrypted message. It was from Eleanor Vance. "Mr. David Harrison, Aerolux CEO Richard Danville, is airborne en route to Paris, Charles de Gaulle, from London. He will meet your flight upon arrival. A private suite is being arranged for your debrief at the airport. Legal counsel is on standby. Full investigation protocols initiated regarding Captain Stallard and any systemic failures at Aerolux. We have your back, sir." David showed it to Sarah. She read it, and a grim satisfaction settled on her face. "Good," she said simply. As the Airbus A350 began its descent towards Paris, the city lights twinkling below, like a carpet of scattered diamonds. The mood within the Harrison family was a complex mix of lingering anger, profound disappointment, and a steely resolve. Their Parisian anniversary trip had been irrevocably tainted, but something far more significant was now in motion. The landing was smooth. As the plane taxied towards the gate at Charles de Gaulle, Captain Stallard's voice came over the PA, no longer booming with authority, but subdued, almost meek. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have now arrived in Paris. On behalf of Aerolux Premier and your entire flight crew, I hope you had a pleasant journey." The irony was lost on no one who knew the real story. When the seatbelt sign dinged off a senior ground agent, immediately entered the aircraft, bypassing first class, and heading straight for the Harrisons in premium economy. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, I'm Jean-Luc Dubois, head of VIP services for Aerolux Paris. Please allow me to escort you." The Harrisons unbuckled, collected their belongings, and were led towards the front, passing the now empty first-class pods they should have occupied. As they reached the aircraft door, they saw him, Captain Rex Stallard, standing rigidly by the cockpit entrance, his face ashen. Also present was a stern-looking man in a sharp suit, whom David vaguely recognized from corporate briefings, Richard Danville, the CEO of Aerolux Premier, looking deeply troubled. Several airport officials and what looked like airline security personnel were waiting on the jet bridge. Stallard stepped forward as David approached. "Mr. Harrison, sir, He began, his voice a hoarse croak. David Harrison simply looked at him, a long, silent appraisal that conveyed more than any words could. Then, without a word, he brushed past him and stepped onto the jet bridge, his family following. Karma had arrived in Paris. and for Captain Rex Stallard, it was clear that his descent was just beginning. Okay, let's expand Part 6, significantly delving deeper into the immediate fallout, the investigation, Stallard's complete unraveling, and the broader impact of the Harrisons' stand. The scene that greeted the Harrison family as they stepped from the Airbus A350 onto the jet bridge at Charles de Gaulle was one of barely suppressed corporate pandemonium. Richard Danville, the CEO of Aerolux Premier, was a man whose public image was typically one of polished calm and confident leadership. Now he looked ashen, his usually impeccable suit appearing rumpled as if he'd wrestled with a bear and lost. His eyes, usually sharp and assessing, were wide with a mixture of dread and a desperate eagerness to placate. He had, as Eleanor Vance had informed, David rerouted his own flight from a conference in London, a frantic mid-air course correction mirroring the nosedive Captain Stallard's career was about to take. Mr. Harrison, Mrs. Harrison, young Mr. Harrison, Miss Harrison. Danville began his voice a little breathless as he practically lunged forward, hand outstretched. Words cannot adequately express my profound apologies, the apologies of every single employee at Aerolux Premier, for the utterly reprehensible, wholly unacceptable treatment you were subjected to today. It is an outrage, a disgrace to our uniform and our name. I came the instant I was alerted. David Harrison met his gaze, his own expression unyielding, but not overtly hostile. He accepted the handshake. It was firm, if a little clammy. Mr. Danville, your prompt personal attention is noted. And yes, unacceptable is an accurate descriptor for our experience. Sarah Harrison, her arm protectively around Chloe, added her voice, cool and precise. We trust this personal attention will translate into concrete systemic action, Mr. Danville. This was not merely poor customer service. Captain Rex Stallard, who had trailed them out of the aircraft like a ghost at a feast, hovered miserably a few feet away. Two imposing figures, clearly airline security supervisors, dispatched by Danville's advance team, flanked him subtly but unmistakably. They hadn't laid a hand on him, but their presence was a clear indicator that his authority had evaporated. He looked shrunken, his uniform once, a symbol of his command, now appearing like an ill-fitting costume on a disgraced actor. Mr. Harrison, sir, Stallard croaked, taking a hesitant step forward, his face pleading. If I could just say, there were pressures. The schedule. Danville didn't even turn his head, but his voice cut Stallard off like a guillotine. Captain Stallard, you will have ample opportunity to provide your statement to the official review panel. For now, your silence is advisable. The command was soft-spoken, but absolute. Stallard flinched, as if struck, and visibly deflated, further color draining from his already pale face. The security men shifted almost imperceptibly closer. The Harrisons were then guided with an almost reverent urgency by Jean-Luc Dubois, Aerolux's head of Parisian VIP services, whose earlier professional courtesy now bordered on outright deference. They bypassed the bustling immigration halls and the snaking customs queues through a series of discreet corridors and private elevators, a privilege usually reserved for visiting royalty or heads of state. It led them to an opulent, soundproofed VIP suite hidden away in a quiet corner of the terminal. The contrast between the public humiliation they had endured on the plane and the almost sycophantic solicitude now being shown was not lost on them. Inside the suite, Eleanor Vance, COO of Harrison Aviation Group, was already present, a figure of calm efficiency amidst the swirling undercurrents of crisis. She rose as they entered, her demeanor professional, but with a hint of protective warmth for the family she served. With her were two senior legal counsels from Harrison Aviation's Paris office and Aerolux's own chief legal officer. A woman who looked as though she'd aged a decade since breakfast. A spread of refreshments lay untouched on a mahogany table. The debrief began immediately. David and Sarah recounted the entire saga from the almost imperceptible coolness of the check-in agent to the dismissive glances from other passengers, culminating in Captain Stallard's arrogant ultimatum and the humiliating trek to premium economy. Sarah, with her lawyer's precision, detailed the psychological impact on Chloe, the feeling of being singled out, and the blatant disregard for their contractual rights. Elias then took center stage, calmly connecting his laptop to a large screen in the suite. He played the video clips he had recorded. The audio was crystal clear. Stallard's condescending pronouncements, his flimsy weight and balance, excuse his threat to have them deplaned. It all played out unedited and damning. He then presented his research into Stallard's online footprint, the anonymized forum posts hinting at a pattern of similar behavior. "There's a digital breadcrumb trail, Mr. Danville," Elias concluded, his voice steady, suggesting this wasn't an isolated lapse in judgment, but potentially a modus operandi. Richard Danville watched the footage, his face growing progressively stonier. He made notes, his pen scratching furiously. When Elias finished, there was a heavy silence in the room, broken only by the quiet hum of the air conditioning. The Aerolux chief legal officer looked like she wanted the ground to swallow her. "Captain Stallard has been formally suspended, effective immediately without pay, pending the outcome of a full and rigorous investigation." Danville finally stated, his voice tight with controlled fury. "However, Mr. Harrison, Mrs. Harrison, what I have just seen and heard transcends any need for a protracted inquiry to determine the fundamental facts of his gross misconduct. His actions constitute a flagrant dereliction of duty, a shameful abuse of authority, a violation of every principle Aerolux Premier claims to stand for, and frankly, a profound betrayal of the trust placed in him. His career with this airline is without question over." Sarah Harrison pressed further. "His termination is a necessary first step, Mr. Danville. But our concern as the primary investors in this airline goes deeper. This pilot operated with impunity. His history, as Elias has indicated, suggests prior incidents that were clearly not addressed with sufficient gravity. What breakdowns in your internal oversight allowed a man like Rex Stallard to remain in command, to feel so emboldened as to treat any passenger, let alone us, in such a manner? This isn't just about one bad apple. It's about the barrel." Danville met her gaze directly. "You are absolutely correct, Mrs. Harrison. This incident has exposed failings that I, as CEO, must take ultimate responsibility for. We are not just talking about disciplinary action against one individual. We are initiating an immediate top-to-bottom review of our crew conduct policies, our customer complaint escalation processes, our diversity, equity, and inclusion training programs, or lack thereof, it would seem, and the efficacy of our internal affairs investigation unit. We will identify every point of failure that allowed this to happen, and we will rectify it. No excuses, no half measures." David Harrison then laid out his terms not as requests, but as directives from the owner. "We are not primarily seeking financial compensation for this fiasco, Mr. Danville, though the breach of contract and the distress caused are self-evident. Our investment in Aerolux was predicated on it becoming a paragon of service and safety. What we demand is demonstrable systemic reform." He then articulated the points: a complete overhaul of anti-discrimination training designed in consultation with leading experts and with input from Harrison Aviation's own ethics committee. A new, transparent and vigorously enforced whistleblower and passenger complaint system with independent oversight, proactive recruitment and promotion strategies to ensure diversity at all levels of Aerolux, especially in flight crews and leadership, and a full, unequivocal public apology from Aerolux Premier. Not just a carefully worded corporate statement, but a genuine admission of failure and a commitment to do better to be issued within 24 hours. He also stipulated that a significant portion of any financial penalties or savings from Stallard's contract termination be channeled into a new foundation dedicated to promoting diversity in aviation careers. Danville listened, nodding gravely, his legal team taking copious notes. "Mr. Harrison, consider it done. Every point. We will draft the apology tonight with your input. We will immediately engage the consultants you recommend. Your standards of ethical operation at Harrison Aviation Group will become the blueprint for Aerolux's future." He paused. "And the foundation idea is inspired. We will make that happen." Meanwhile, in a stark, windowless office elsewhere in the airport's administrative block, Captain Rex Stallard was facing his own reckoning. Two stern-faced HR executives and Aerolux's head of flight operations conducted his initial interview. His union representative was present, but looked increasingly uncomfortable as the interview progressed. Stallard attempted to bluster to portray himself as a victim of a misunderstanding of unclear directives and the immense pressure of on-time departures. He even tried to suggest the Harrisons had been argumentative and uncooperative. Then they played Elias's video. Stallard watched himself, his face contorting as his own arrogant words filled the small room. His defenses crumbled. The evidence was irrefutable, his demeanor on the recording utterly indefensible. He was confronted with printouts of the previous informal complaints. Elias had flagged complaints that had been logged but apparently never fully investigated or dismissed as, he said, she said. The pattern of behavior was undeniable. The head of flight operations, a veteran pilot himself, looked at Stallard with unconcealed disgust. "Rex, what in God's name were you thinking weight and balance to clear out first class for? For whom, exactly?" There were no last-minute VIPs, no government directives. You lied to passengers, you falsified a reason for operational change, and you brought this airline into severe disrepute. And you did it to the owners. Stallard could only stare at his hands, his face ashen. The formal letter of immediate suspension pending termination was read to him. He was instructed to surrender his company, ID, his flight licenses pending review by the FAA and EASA. As Aerolux was a transatlantic carrier and was informed he would be escorted from airport property, his access to Aerolux systems was revoked as he sat there. As predicted, the story carefully curated by Elias and released through a trusted aviation journalist known for his integrity hit the newswires like a thunderclap. Owned pilot kicks family off. Flight discovers. They own the airline, screamed one headline. Aerolux in crisis after first-class fiasco. CEO apologizes to airline owners, read another. Social media exploded. Hashtag flying. While Black, airline owned, and #karma is a pilot trended for days. Public condemnation of Stallard was universal and scathing. Aerolux's reputation took an immediate severe hit, with booking cancellations spiking overnight. True to Danville's word, Aerolux, with guidance from Eleanor Vance and David Harrison himself, issued a comprehensive and remarkably candid public apology within hours. It acknowledged the discriminatory nature of the incident, named Stallard, who was now officially fired, detailed the immediate corrective actions being taken, and announced the new foundation. This swift, transparent, and substantive response helped to staunch the bleeding, turning some of the narrative from outrage at Aerolux to outrage with Aerolux against the disgraced pilot, and cautious optimism about the promised reforms. The hard karma for Rex Stallard was relentless and complete. He became an instant pariah in the tightly knit aviation community. Airlines worldwide blacklisted him. His appeals against his firing were swiftly dismissed. The FAA and EASA launched their own investigations, which eventually resulted in the suspension of his commercial pilot license for a significant period due to unprofessional conduct and falsification of operational justifications. Stripped of his career, his reputation, and a large part of his pension, he was forced to sell his waterfront home and downsize dramatically. Friends and colleagues distanced themselves. The once proud captain was reduced to a cautionary tale, eventually finding work flying ancient cargo planes for a non-union outfit in the Alaskan wilderness, a lonely and bitter existence far removed from the prestige of commanding an Airbus A350 for a premier international carrier. The irony of him now actually dealing with weight and balance issues on aging prop planes was not lost on those who followed his downfall. For senior flight attendant Karen, the incident was a harsh but transformative wake-up call. She faced a formal disciplinary hearing, received a severe reprimand, and was mandated to undergo intensive empathy and de-escalation training, which she later admitted was long overdue in the industry. She became a more thoughtful and proactive crew member, eventually volunteering to help pilot the new peer-to-peer reporting system for problematic conduct. Co-pilot Mark Jenkins praised for his integrity and calm handling of communications. Once the truth was known, found his career accelerated. He was commended for his actions and was on the command upgrade list within 18 months. Maria, the junior flight attendant, whose simple empathy had been noted by Sarah, received a special commendation and became a quiet example of how crew should behave. The Harrison family, though their anniversary trip had begun under a cloud of ignominy, continued to Paris. They found moments of joy, but the experience lingered. David and Sarah channeled their frustration into constructive action, remaining actively involved in overseeing the sweeping changes at Aerolux. They attended follow-up meetings, reviewed training materials, and ensured the new policies were not just window dressing, but were being embedded into the airline's DNA. Their ordeal born of prejudice had inadvertently provided them with the ultimate leverage to enforce the standards of excellence and respect they had always envisioned for their company. The Airbus A350 flight, AL777, continued its transatlantic crossings. But it flew for an airline irrevocably changed, an airline forced to confront its own internal failings in the most public and embarrassing way imaginable. The story of the Harrisons and Captain Stallard became a legend in aviation circles, a potent reminder that true authority comes not from a uniform or a title, but from integrity, and that sometimes the most unassuming passengers hold the power to reshape an entire industry, one humiliating, karmic, justice-filled flight at a time. And so Captain Rex Stallard's high-flying career plummeted to earth a stark and public lesson that arrogance, prejudice, and the abuse of power carry a hefty price tag, especially when you unknowingly target the very people who sign your paychecks. The Harrison family, through their dignity and resolve, didn't just reclaim their rightful place. They initiated a cascade of change within Aerolux Premier, transforming a moment of profound disrespect into a lasting legacy of reform. They proved that even the ugliest biases can be confronted, and that true power lies in using one's influence not for retribution alone, but for creating a better, more equitable world, or at least a more respectful experience in the skies. What are your thoughts on Captain Stallard's spectacular downfall, and the way the Harrisons handled this shocking situation? Have you ever witnessed such a blatant abuse of authority, and how was it resolved? Drop your stories and opinions in the comments below. We'd love to hear them. If you were gripped by this incredible story of karma served at cruising altitude, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with friends who appreciate a good tale of justice, and most importantly, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss our next journey into compelling real-life dramas and unforgettable stories. Thanks for watching, and until next time, may your travels always be respectful and your landings smooth.